Just let everybody know that you are recording, Cheryl.
Okay. I'll start with the question.
We must maybe just add that into our preamble. Just kind of be like a, oh, by the way, we're recording you. Not like a, does everybody mind? Just like a, you know.
Please be aware, yeah, like when you call customer service, they tell you, oh,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
purposes of quality, this record will be recorded.
Okay, guys, I'm going to admit all. I'm admitting.
Cheryl, you've got the slides, hey?
I've got mine.
Okay.
I've got mine ready. I just need to share it when it is time.
Okay, cool. I'm going to kind of zoom out. Mute.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Cheryl. With the COVID-19 pandemic, change is happening all around us. Change's Rehab Family and Loved Ones Support Group is no different. In order to keep our patients and their families safe, we have moved to an online platform. This will continue to be held for the foreseeable future. Sorry, guys, if I stop, it just means I'm letting people into the waiting room. We are honored that families and loved ones from all over the world have the opportunity to be present from the safety of your homes. As I said, my name is Cheryl, and I would like to welcome you all to the Changes Family Rehab Support Group. It's an online support group. This meeting is a recurring meeting which will take place every Tuesday at 1800 hours South African time. It will run for approximately an hour till 7 o'clock. You're welcome to stay behind and chat in the chat room thereafter. We observe anonymity and confidentiality at this meeting, and nobody is permitted to speak about another person. We ask that you do not gossip. This platform is open to learn new ways of dealing with addiction and recovery in a healthy way. Please do not ask us direct questions relating to your loved one. We will, however, answer questions about addiction and recovery. You're probably filled with fear and anxiety and have many questions to ask. At this point, I would like to mention that we do record the first part of the meeting, the part where the counsellor does the presentation, and then we switch off the recording when the family start to ask questions and to share. Please give this meeting a chance. We may not answer all your questions at once, but you will find that with regular attendance, you will understand more and discover that there's hope to live with and recover from your loved one's addiction. We may confuse you. You may hear our laughter and you may see our tears. This is where we are just for today. We have found that living with addiction is frightening, mortifying, and yet in time, we could eventually accept and understand this disease. We are here for ourselves, for our own recovery, sometimes irrespective of whether our loved one is in recovery or not. As addiction is a lengthy process, so too is recovery. We're unable to offer a quick fix or miraculous solution. If you like us, we needed to commit to our own recovery process and keep coming back in order for us to find these solutions. The only advice we're prepared to offer is live just for today. This group is not affiliated with any other group, religious, political, or outside enterprise. We neither endorse nor oppose any cause. What you hear here are our personal experiences and opinions. We feel we've earned the right to say them. We're here to share information, personal experiences, and offer one another hope. Sorry, I'm battling with the slideshow. The only requirements to be part of this group are confidentiality. Who you see here, what you hear here, please let it stay here. We ask if you've had any alcohol or drugs within the last 12 hours, kindly do not speak on this meeting platform. We believe it might be the chemicals talking and not you. Each meeting, the host will do a presentation. You're welcome to be present with or without your video on. We will allow space for questions before we close. Please raise your hand if you want to speak. We will limit this to 2 minutes per person. For longer chats, please feel free to use the chat room after the meeting. We will answer questions pertaining to the topic shared at each meeting. Please feel free to contact us via the website, www.changesrehab.co.za, or via email, change@changesrehab.co.za. We will now commence with our meeting, and we hope that you will get some new ideas that will help you to deal with your loved one's addiction. Okay, tonight we are fortunate to have Brian, who is going to do the presentation. I know last week we spoke about codependency, but Brian was set to do tonight's workshop, so he's going to do tonight, and I'm going to do the next 2 weeks, so next week and the following week, and that topic will be on codependency. So before I hand over to Brian, Brian works with Carmen and Victoria at the Changes River Manor. He's had a lot of time with us at Changes Northcliffe, so he knows most of the families and the clients and patients from the farm and the staff. So Brian, thank you. We're going to hand over to you.
Thank you, Cheryl. Good evening to everyone. Good evening to our families and friends that are joining us in this evening. Yeah, it's a pleasure. I know a lot of families always wonder and question what happens in rehab. What happens when they talk about a program? What do they mean? What happens when we refer people to do long-term treatment at River Manor? What actually happens? So tonight we're going to look at a program of recovery that has been tested and has given off results. And we'll go through each and every step. These are the 12 steps of AANA of recovery that we usually walk through with our clients. They have been tested. I think the biggest challenge that people in recovery face is I'm struggling alone and there's no solution, and therefore, what can I do to overcome this? And maybe before I get into that, just a bit about myself. As Cheryl has introduced me, I'm a counselor at River Manor. I work with Carmen. We focus on the 12 steps program. I'm in recovery as well, and that means that I've had previously a problem with drugs and alcohol, and I've been in recovery for almost 7 years now. So I welcome you all. I'm a product of this program, and I believe in it and I champion it, and I think it produces miracles. As with everything, the 12-step program has a beginning. How did the 12-step program come to be? It was invented, not invented, but reinvented by a gentleman called Bill W. Bill W. was the first person that had awareness of what the problem was. When he was struggling, and this is in 1930s in the USA, when he was struggling with alcoholism, he went and met a doctor, and this kind doctor explained to him that you have an allergic reaction to alcohol. People had been trying to stop from way back, but they did not know why they could never be able to stop. They didn't understand what alcohol does to them or in them. And so for the first time, this gentleman had an understanding that I have this allergic reaction, and what it means, it means that I react abnormally to alcohol or drugs. The normal reaction to drugs and alcohol is, that's not nice. You know, you feel a little wobbly, you feel sick, you want to sleep, you detest the experience, and you're very aware that too much is bad. But when it comes to an allergic reaction, which most addicts and alcoholics have, it's abnormal in a way that when they drink alcohol or when they take a drug, something in them makes them want more and more and more. And therefore, despite all the consequences, despite all the effects that they're experiencing, they don't or they can't stop. And so therefore, that becomes the allergic reaction due to the nature of their body. And so when Bill W. was given this information by the doctor, he had at least the understanding of the problem. And eventually, a friend of his that had stopped using alcohol and drugs came and visited him to help him in what we call to the 12-stepping him. And he explained to him the solution. This gentleman called Ib had gone to a group called the Oxford Group, where he had found the 6 tenets. The 6 tenets were a program of recovery based on how to distract selfishness and how to serve other human beings. And they were not fully focused on alcohol, they were focused on a lot of issues. But it was a program that was helping this gentleman stop drinking. And they had drunk together for a couple of years. They had drunk together and they had experienced the same kind of bottoms. And when I say bottom, it means where a person's life becomes unmanageable. But regardless of that bottom, we still see people continue to use and to drink. And so now Bill W. has 2 things. He understands the problem, the reaction that he has towards alcohol, and he understands the solution. And the solution is these 6 tenets that Eb told him from the Oxford Group. And now he was faced with a challenge. How do I practice this? Because even though he had been given a program, he hadn't been taught how to practice the program, or he hadn't been shown how to practice the program. So one day he's tossing up and down, he's craving, he wants to use alcohol, and he calls the doctor. The doctor tells him, well, I have some people here, maybe you might want to share your information with them. And that's how he meets Dr. Bob. So when Bill W. met Dr. Bob Smith, that's when it was recognized that if I have a problem with addiction, it helps me so much if I'm helping another human being. And so for the first time, they had all the 3 components. They had the problem, they had the solution, and they had the action plan. And that's how AA came to be. AA came to be in 1935, and it was as a result of Bill W. and Bob getting to meet each other and talking about their problems. Bob eventually got sober, Bill stayed sober, and they helped millions and millions of human beings that were struggling with alcoholism. So through our experience with, and I think Cheryl will attest to this, is recovery is very expansive. Recovery is very engaging. And what that means, it means that we create different programs and different measurements and different skills and different tools for different human beings, because we are all different. But usually 99% of the people that get into the program and do the program get incredible results. And that's why we use the biopsychosocial approach when we are dealing with our clients, because the social aspect, the bio, we deal with it with the psychiatrists and the help of the psychologists and the social as well. But when it comes to ongoing treatment, when it comes to long-term treatment, we've realized that people need a program that keeps them invested, that keeps them, it's also, for the first time as addicts and alcoholics, and I speak from experience, is we are very self-invested. We are mostly focused on what can I get out of the system? What can I do for me? I don't think about anyone else when I'm in active addiction. And when I get into the fellowship, when I get into these support groups like AA and NA and all these anonymous fellowships, for the first time, I'm focused on me, but in a very healthy way. When I go to a meeting, when I work with a sponsor, when I work, and we'll get into all that and how it happens and how it comes to be. I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully we can all see a breakdown of these 12 steps and what each step requires and what each step means. What are the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous? These are basically guiding principles in addiction treatment that outline a course of action, tackling problems, all sorts of problems. As I've explained before, every day we see a lot of, I think currently there are about 100 anonymous programs. all you have to do, if you follow these principles, if you follow these spiritual principles, no matter what your addiction is, no matter what you're struggling with, I think there's also a lot of, for example, there's a new one called Emotional Anonymous. So whatever you're struggling with, by doing these 12 steps, you get to be more aware of who you are, what makes you tick, and what doesn't serve you. So as with everything in life, we begin off with the step one. Usually step one is experienced before it is actually done. A lot of people, by the time we come into treatment, we kind of sort of know we have a problem with alcohol, we have a problem with drugs, and our lives have become unmanageable, but it's family, it's friends, it's everyone else telling us that we have to look at what the damage we're doing instead of us doing. So when people come to us, the first thing that we do in the first 28 days, and sometimes that's not even enough, that's what we focus on, and that's a step one. In order for me to move forward, I must admit by myself that I am powerless over alcohol. And that when I drink alcohol, when I use drugs, or when I act out in any behavioral stuff, my life becomes unmanageable. And the evidence of that unmanageability sometimes is me coming to rehab. Sometimes there's what we call a pre-treatment chaos, pre-treatment chaos, when, you know, I've sold my mother's car, I'm running away from debts, I'm trying to manage life, and I'm really, really failing. And the main principle around step one is hope. The first word is we. For the first time, you have to realize that, okay, I'm not alone in this situation. There are a lot of people that have been through this, and they're saying we are powerless over alcohol. Obviously, as with human nature, the moment we talk about powerlessness, people are thinking, how can I be powerless? I've been able to accomplish a lot of things. I've gone to school, I have a job, I have a family, I have all these things. We're not taking that away. But what we're saying is that you have less power when it comes to alcohol. Your choice in deciding whether to drink or whether to use is less. And the reason is that you have a problem with, you are an addict or you are an alcoholic. It's very empowering. It's very empowering for any client that comes to us to take that step. That's why, and it's also the foundation, and that's why we spend a lot of time, because once you do that foundation step, then it empowers you to make the other steps. And we go through that. We do the 60 and 60 stories, and sometimes in those stories, you'll find people are not acknowledging their responsibility. And if they're not acknowledging their responsibility and their unmanageability, then it means we have to do this again. But once the step one is done and the person is able to do a step two. Step one is the only step that you're required to do 100%. When people relapse, when people go back to using drugs and alcohol, it's because they forgot the powerlessness that they have in regards to alcohol and drugs. And what that denial does, if I forget that I have a problem with alcohol and drugs, I'm going to assume mentally that I can have a drink and there won't be problems. Maybe there won't be problems initially, but over time, I'll end up in unmanageability phase. If you have any questions as we go ahead, please use the chat box. And maybe at the end of this, we'll be able to answer specific questions. Okay, so step one, we assume you've done a foundation. Usually what happens is, with the help of the counselor, with the help of the therapeutic team, will help you to understand that. Because as an addict, I'm not looking at myself, I'm looking outside. If the government did better, if my folks did better, if my friends treated me better, if my wife treated me better, I'm not able to look at that. But when you come in treatment, the therapeutic team helps you to focus on yourself and realize what role you have played in your circumstances. And then we get to step two. Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. So came to believe, it's a process. Usually, obviously, when it comes to spiritual terms, there'll be a lot of stances around that. There'll be a lot of, but the basic thing that we say is that when it comes to drugs and alcohol, you are unable to control yourself. And because you're unable to control yourself, you're unable to act sanely. When we talk about a power greater than you, we don't mean specifically any religious connotations. No, we are saying believe. Even me talking to clients, sometimes all we use is good order direction, and that can be your God. But you have to believe there is something. You can call it universe, you can call it whatever it is, and it's a process. And usually it's a process that as people stay sober, as people stay clean, that realization comes to them. They find this relationship which helps them to live life sanely compared to when they were in insanity. Usually by the time when people come to River Manor, we make sure that because of the flow processes, because of the slowness of the program, they have opportunities to question that ideal of a power greater than themselves. And because it's also very calm and very serene, it gives them that opportunity. Okay. And then we get to step 3. If you have found a relationship with that higher power, and that higher power is dependent on how you understand them. If you have started at least coming to, then you make a decision to turn your will and your life over to the care of God as you understand him. And I think this is one of the most amazing things about the 12-step program. They're not saying my grandfather's God, or my government's God, or my father's God, or any God that they're telling me, as I understand that higher power, as I understand God. It means that whether I'm Muslim, whether I'm Buddhist, I have to make a decision to turn my will and my life. And we can break it down further to look at, what does will mean? Will means what I am thinking. What is my thought? How do I think of myself? How do I think of others? Am I really, really thinking of others in a very productive and healthy way? Or am I thinking of others in a very selfish and dishonest way? If I think of a greater good or a good order or direction, my values are changed. How I perceive myself are changed. How I perceive others, that is changed. So you have to surrender. And usually this is a long process as well, because it comes with spirituality and it comes individualistic nature, where at the end of the day, you're first with the decision, should I go on or should I make a new way to find a new way of life? And usually what happens is, because we've experienced step 1 and step 2, it has prepared a person to get to step 3. And then we get to step 4, made a searching and fierce moral inventory of ourselves. I think this is the most interesting and most uplifting experience any individual can go through. I think as human beings, we all need sometimes to slow down. Life is so busy, it gets overwhelming. We get caught up in, the nitty-gritty of life, and we never get an opportunity to look at ourselves and see how our values are in disarray, or how we have messed up in some way or another. So when they say made the searching and fierce, it means it's not gonna be easy. It's gonna be hard. I mean, I just came into treatment. I'm struggling. My mom is angry. My father's angry. Everyone is angry. And it's their fault. It's not my fault, right? But if I'm going to stay sober, they're asking me, well, moral inventory of me. How can I look at myself after all the guilt and the shame that I have? I don't want to, but I am sober now. The assumption is that maybe I'm sober, maybe a month, maybe I've transitioned to River Manor, and maybe I'm 2 months sober. So I start slowing down and thinking, what did I do wrong? How can I change that? And it's not more about, as human beings, we're both good and bad, I presume. It's about, because of addiction, all the good is buried. I'm not a bad person. I just have this bad drinking problem that makes me treat my folks like I don't care about them. So what step 4 does, it unearths the good. It brings out the good qualities as well. It helps me to stop and look at, okay, what are my character flaws? What things can I change in order to plan for my future ahead? Because if I'm going to stay sober long term, and that's the priority of recovery, is that we don't stop. Everyone gets an opportunity to stop, but how do we stay stopped? I need to slow down and look at what things lead me into trouble and how can I change them. Okay, and that's step 4. Step 4 is usually we'll have people struggle, but our team is very, very professional and qualified, and we usually support them at that time. A lot of things usually come up, but because they're in the safe space, I usually tell my clients, think of this as a journey. You want to go on a holiday somewhere, let's say to the Caribbean island. It's uncomfortable how you get there, but as long as you get there, that's the objective. And at that time, usually by step 4, people are willing, they're more willing, they've tested some bit of sobriety, and it's quite a life-changing process, because once you look at yourself and see what your character defects are, it's empowering to know, if I want to be a better person, how can I change that? Okay, and now step 5, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of my wrongs. Usually what happens, we encourage 12-step fellowships. When people leave River Manor, we encourage them, or when they join the halfway house, we encourage them to get a sponsor. A sponsor is a person that has been in recovery for a while and has gone through the 12-step program. And that person helps guide you on how to work the program. So when they say to another human being, that's what usually happens. And sometimes, because treatment involves a lot of aspects to it, sometimes people talk to their counselor, sometimes they talk to the psychologist, but it's all about, I don't want to carry this pain anymore, and I trust enough to share this pain with someone else. And when it comes to admitted to God, I think it's a principle that has been in existence for a long time, where there's that relief that comes with confessing your sins. And it's not confessing your sins, it's acknowledging that you're unhappy and you're struggling because of these things. Admitted to God, ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. It's also very empowering for the first time to be able to look at, okay, this is my life, and if I want to move forward, this is what I have to look at, and this is what I have to change. That drives us into step 6. We're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. As human beings, sometimes all we need is willingness and acknowledgement. And what usually happens is, okay, so I have all these character defects, but some of these character defects serve me. You know, some of these character defects help me to preserve my ego, to preserve my self-esteem. And some of these, I don't want to let go of them. But at the same time, I'm aware, because of my step 4, I'm aware that they cause me a lot of pain. So there's a willingness that comes with entirely being ready to have God or higher power, good order, direction, or whatever it is that is not you. Because if you were that powerful, you would not have a problem with drugs and alcohol. You would be powerful. We have already established that. So we come to understand that I need help in regard to getting rid of these character defects. And that good order direction will guide you through that. Humbly ask him. So step 7 is humbly ask him to remove our shortcomings. Finding humility. Humility is a big value in coming into recovery, and it's also to be able to accept, I'm not perfect, I'm struggling. Who wants to show up in rehab and say, I have a drug problem? Most of our clients have already admitted that to themselves. So when you come to step 7, you're admitting, you're applying the same humility and the same principle that you used on step 1 to say, I'm not okay and I need help, and you can only remove that help. Okay, step 8, made a list of all persons he had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. So I've looked at the harms I've done to people. What Bill W. did was create buffer steps. So before I ask my higher power to remove my shortcomings, I have to be ready. Before when we're doing step 4, we were preparing for step 8. Made a list of all persons I had harmed, because when I was doing a moral inventory, I looked at the people that I've harmed. I looked at people that I have done wrong. I looked at who I've done wrong and what I've done to them. And so I make a list of all these people, and I become willing to make amends to them all. the willing is a process. Some people I don't want to make amends to, so we don't push it. But if I want to stay clean, if I want to stay sober, there's a price that I pay. And that price is destruction of ego. Ego, as I like to call it, is edging God out, which makes me think I am God. And I think the assumption in recovery is that you're everything except God. And if you follow certain principles, you give yourself a better chance of recovery and long-term recovery especially. Okay, so now you've made the list and you've become willing. And if you're struggling, and usually our clients will struggle, but by the time they get to step 8, they've been in treatment for about 3 months, minimum 3 months. So it means that they are ready and they are willing. And by that time, it's not so hard. And if it's hard, there's therapy, there's groups, there's a lot of support that comes from AA and NA that helps them become ready. And now we get to step 9. May direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. This, if you've done a step 8, it means you've prepared, and then you come to step 9. It's about making amends. It's not about saying forgive me. They say the best form of amends are changed behaviors. And what usually has happened in our past is we have harmed a lot of people. We've caused people pain, and we really want to take away that pain. So what happens when we get to step 9, we don't aim to take away that pain, but we aim to rectify our mistakes. We aim to rectify the relationships. We aim to make these amends and whatever. And the support group, fellowship, is very helpful, because what happens is when we go to these meetings, you hear how people have done their step 9, and then you realize, okay, I'm not so alone. And maybe if I can work this program, maybe I can get the forgiveness that I think I need, or whatever support that I think I need from anyone that I feel I'm resentful towards. Okay, step 10 is a maintenance step. It says continue to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. Recovery is a long-term process. If I do not change, if I do not maintain the change that I've garnered, and that's why we usually recommend long-term treatment and continuum of care, is that I will so easily go back into my old ways. So I need to be able every day, it's like a mini step 4. Before I go to sleep, I do a personal inventory. And these are all processes that have like a structural thing. There's a way I do a step 10, and that was outlaid in the big book, which is a book like this. And that is the book where all these 12 steps are derived from. So continue to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. That's a maintenance step. You go through that every day, and that's why you see once you put down drugs and alcohol, there's an opportunity for growth. And that growth does not come as a result of putting down drugs and alcohol, but it comes as a result of continuous work, continuous effort, continuous growth, being aware of what's happening around me, being aware of how I impact other human beings and how I can show up differently every other day. Step 11, so through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood Him, praying only for knowledge of His will and for us to carry, and the power to carry that out. This is a more awareness step. A lot of us through active addiction, a lot of our clients, life is so busy when you're in active addiction, trying to get drugs, you're trying to pay up your dealer, life is so busy, you never get moment to stay calm and peaceful and serene and to be aware of what's happening with you. And also just to be grateful for the fact that you don't use anymore and there's growth and all that. So once you're going through a step 11, you learn to sometimes prayers, thank you, sometimes prayers, gratitude, sometimes prayer can be you doing some good gesture for someone else, but all you're trying to do is to connect more with the universe, connect more with yourself. And by connecting with yourself, you're also connecting with the human beings around and about you. And then that takes us to the 12 step, which is having had a spiritual awakening as a result of the steps. We try to carry this message to alcoholics and practice these principles in all our affairs. Recovery is a lifelong journey. Stopping the use of drugs and alcohol is just the beginning. The lifelong journey involves me, involves all people that are in recovery helping other human beings stop. And that's how the 12-step fellowship came to be, because one individual stopped using drugs and alcohol, and then eventually he was able to help someone. And those 100 people in 1935 have mushroomed into millions and millions of people in sobriety today. And that's what we call the 12-stepping. 12-stepping is when I get over myself, get over how shitty my day was, get over how I feel, get over any negative connotation that I might be having in my life, and participate in the fellowship by helping a newcomer, by setting up a meeting, by helping in any way that I can, as a result of having gone through the other 11 steps. And it's very important. That's how the fellowship, if you go on your phone and you Google AA or NAO, you'll find all these numerous meetings. And what those people that have set up these meetings are doing, they're doing what we call the 12-step. And I guess what all this means is that recovery doesn't end. And even though it has a beginning, the beginning doesn't happen when people come into rehab. The beginning happens way before, when they're in active addiction and they're going through their experiences and they're going through their pain and they're realizing, oh God, my life is unmanageable. And what we usually encourage is, it takes about 60 to 90 days for clarity of the brain to return from drug use. And it takes a long time. Like when you come to 12-step, it's something that you have to do for the rest of your life. And what this does as a principle of helping others, I get over myself, I get out of myself, I focus on supporting others, because in that way I actively participate in my recovery long term. And I think that's the gist of it. So I know it's quite tricky, or it's quite complicated when you don't know what program happens, but that's one of the programs that happens at the farm. We give our clients worksheets to work through all these 12 steps. And most times by the time they finish, in about 3 months, they've done up to 6 step. And then when they go into the halfway house, then they do their amends, then they start maintaining. It's very important that I practice all these 12 steps in a normal life. I can practice them if I'm in a rehab, in a setup, but if I do not do what we call the transitional stage of practicing these steps, then I'm not sure if it will work. So we usually encourage people, after you've done the written work in rehab, in the primary and secondary care program, then you transition to the halfway house, and from there, you can be able to practice all these principles every day as you live, every day as you maintain recovery. Yeah, and I think that's it. Cheryl?
Thank you, Brian. I'm sorry, I've got barking dogs here, so that's why I've also kept it muted. No if I mute myself, it's because I'm shouting at the dogs. Okay. Thank you, Brian. That was a really insightful, human way of describing the 12 steps, and I think you covered it really nicely. So the questions are starting to come in, and I think the one question that we've got in, I think, is very important, and it's on most people's minds, is how many steps on average do we successfully conclude in the first 4 weeks at Changes with our clients? So I think it's important that we try and conceptualize what Brian has just spoken about. Step 1 is probably one of the most important steps, because it's admitting and accepting powerlessness. But I think it goes one step further, and I like to add acting to change. Because it's very easy for a chemically dependent person to say, I'm powerless over alcohol, my life became unmanageable, poor me. So step one, that admitting, isn't just the verbal explanation of I admit I'm powerless. It's a deeper understanding of what a mess I have made of my life. Not my mother, not society, not the government, not my boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, but the mess I've made in my life through drugs and alcohol. And that can take people years to actually work through. And in years, I'm talking sometimes 2. So in terms of treatment, we get them to do a comprehensive step 1 in the first 3 weeks at primary care. And only when they get to the Changes River Manor do they have more time and space to do step 2 till 6. I think some of them generally try and finish by the time they finish there in 3 to 6 months. Each person goes through the step differently, individually. So as much as we, in treatment, will do the step work, the comprehension and the understanding depends on each person. So, a lot of people come into treatment forced by their families or the courts, and they will often say to their families, I've done a comprehensive step 1. They're holding me back. I need to do step 2. But if they're still arrogant, and if they're still in denial, and if they are still challenging, then they have not completed an accurate step 1. When somebody's done a good step 1, we already start seeing the signs of humility. And when we see the signs of humility and then comprehensive, like humility in all our actions, that's when they're ready to start doing a step 4. So for us, we used to say we try and do step 1, 2, 3. But if we think about it logically, the first week that somebody's in rehab, they're detoxing. They're getting seen by the psychiatrist and they're getting onto medication. They are not ready to get spiritual, to get humble, to lose the arrogance. They're still scared. They're still filled with guilt and shame. So if we had to push them too quickly to do step 2, which is came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity, then that would, they probably didn't need rehab if that happened very quickly. Because step 2 is becoming willing to engage with a power greater than ourselves that's all about good. And for most addicts, they do not know what good is. They need time. Step 3, which is about surrender, ultimately, can take forever. Because people, and think about it from the family perspective, we surrender and then we take back. And then we surrender and we take back. And what do we mean by that is, I'll say, okay, you know what? Tell me what to do. Tell me what you want me to do and I'll do it. And I say, okay, I want you to do long-term treatment, 90 meetings in 90 days, get a sponsor. Oh, no, I don't do sponsors. I'm not trusting anybody. So they're still holding on to levels of arrogance and fear. So the reality of this is the 12 steps is not 12 days, 12 months, 12 hours. It can take each person however long it takes them. We have guys and girls living in the halfway house who've been there for 18 months and they're on step 3. And there's nothing wrong with their recovery. They're working hard. They are humble. They're taking responsibility. But they did a really comprehensive step 1, 2, and busy with step 3. So we don't gauge a person's level of sobriety and recovery by what step they're at. We gauge it in terms of humility, letting go of the arrogance, taking the suggestions, and what are they achieving? And not achieving in work or school, but achieving in getting deep into themselves and getting all that pain out and all the shame and all the guilt, but also allowing somebody like us to challenge those defenses. Because if we had to sit in just an NA meeting, people share. Nobody challenges them to say, you're actually talking nonsense. Whereas in treatment, we can do that. We say, this is very dishonest. At an NA or AA meeting, they just say, you know what, we'll love you till you're ready to love yourself. So it's important that treatment centers offer the 12-step program, but it's also important to know that that's not all that we offer. It's part of the fundamentals of our program, and it's what Brian was saying earlier, that takes him to sustainable long-term sobriety. But treatment, our job is to dismantle all their different defense mechanisms and challenge them. And in a way, we say to them things that the families already said, but they hear us differently.
And I think maybe to add, Cheryl, what you've just said, I think it's not about how much written work I have done. It's more how much have I changed. And change is a process. I surrender this week, next week I take back my will. So it's a constant growth. And usually what happens is families are the first people to experience this change. And as a family member, you will know if the person is changing and if the benefits of their step one are paying off. But it's a constant. Every day that an addict and alcoholic wakes up, most important thing is to understand step one. It's not about writing the step one. It's about, do I understand that today, just for today, I cannot use drugs or alcohol, no matter what happens. Not when it's just good. No, when the ugly and the good and the bad happen. Can I stay away from alcohol?
Okay, thanks, Brian. I can't see if there's any other questions.
There's DM. Sponsors are trying to get on with their lives, is my understanding. And so is it possible that the actual transformation would need an iterative process?
Okay, so I think what I'm hearing in that is what roles do the counselors, therapeutic team play, what do the sponsors play, and then of course what role does the addict play? You're right, sponsors do have their own recoveries to face and focus on, and they also are trying to get their lives back on track. So a healthy sponsor will give the sponsee specific boundaries. So a lot of people I know will say, phone me 5 o'clock every day. Every second Saturday, it's 11 o'clock, we'll meet and we'll work through your step work. I need you to fax me your written step work every other day, or screenshot me your step work. So they will give them specific guidelines in which to work. And generally I find, like with us it changes. We don't work in tandem with the sponsor, but if somebody says to me, my sponsor has asked me to do 90 meetings in 90 days, I won't override that sponsor. I'll support that sponsor and say, well, he or she obviously thought about it very carefully and I think it's a good idea, so please take your sponsor's suggestion. We've got to remember that the sponsor is a recovering addict or alcoholic themselves, and they've got their own struggles. So it's such a blessing and such a privilege for our loved ones to go into treatment, where they've got a team of professionals, many of them in recovery, but they've got the clinicians as well, the psychologists, psychiatrists, occupational therapists, addiction counselors, the recovery assistants, that we all sort of nudge them on their road to recovery. Because addiction is not just about, and recovery is not just about putting down the alcohol and drugs and saying my life's going to get better. Because most people will actually tell you once they first put the drugs and alcohol down, their lives got worse because they started remembering all the stuff that they had hidden away from themselves. So things that they had done, things that had been done to them. And also, and you'll all know this from your own experiences, but your loved ones' perceptions are very distorted. So if you say good morning, an addict will say, what happened to the afternoon and evening? And you'll think, huh? Or you'll say, are you high? Did you use? I say, well, if you weren't such a terrible mother, you wouldn't be asking me this question. And then you feeling all guilty because now I shouldn't have asked the question, but you had every right to say, are you high? So that's the work that rehabs actually do. We sort out the thought processes. We put them on regulated, healthy medication. We're able to call them out on all their nonsense, their denials, their defense mechanisms, their dishonesties, and we do it in a way that they start gaining insight, that when they get to step 4, they can take their own fearless and moral inventory. Not mom saying, do you know that you robbed me 3 times and you wrote off 2 cars? The addict is saying, you know that I robbed my mom 3 times, I wrote off 2 cars, and I stole from the insurance. So I think the thing that most of us as family members really shy away from is how long recovery actually takes and how long treatment takes. And I think I say this probably, my colleagues can vouch for me, I probably say this every day in the office. These damn medical aids only pay for 3 weeks, and people think that it takes us 3 weeks to help somebody get clean. It doesn't. We treat medical aid patients because that's what they are, the only thing they're willing to pay. But if you think about it, some of our loved ones have been smoking and drinking and using drugs for between 3 and 20 years. And then we want to sort them out in 3 weeks. And we can't, because addicts aren't stupid. They're very, very, very intelligent. And part of that intelligence means that their defense mechanisms are stronger. So to dismantle that means we've got to challenge that, and we challenge that on a daily basis. We can challenge one person, every group, for 3 days about the same thing. And on the 4th day, they'll still turn around and tell us the same thing they told us on day 1. You know, you're not an addict because your mother got divorced. You're an addict because you use drugs. No, I promise you it's because my mother got divorced. No, it's not because of your mother. You're an addict. And then you ask him on Friday, so how are you holding around this? No, I do use drugs, but it's all because of my mother. So that's how long and in depth the work is that we do to help them get a meaningful but sustainable recovery. And I think something that we all hate to hear is that it's a relapsable disease. And, you know, I often use this example, and my client knows that I do. She was on about 60 days of sobriety, and I was pushing her to do step 1, and her sponsor was pushing her to do step 4. And I said to her, look, I'm not going to interfere with your sponsor, but I don't think you're ready for step 4. And she came into my office 3-4 weeks into it, and she said to me, listen, here's my step 4. I went out yesterday, I bought 3 bottles of wine, I got absolutely hammered, and I've written up my entire step 4. And I took her step 4, I closed it, I walked up, I threw it in the dustbin, and I said to her, that's not a step 4. You were drunk, you're an alcoholic. She says, but I needed that to be able to do all my step 4, to do my fearless moral inventory. And I said to her, no, you have to do step 1. And she was so resentful. She carried it for about 2 years. And recently she contacted me. She's about 11 years sober now. But she said she was so resentful that I threw her step 4 away because she really believed she was ready to do step 4, but she was drunk. So each person has their own process with the 12 steps. And some people relapse. And if they do, we make them go back to step 1. Even if they've done the 12 steps 3 times, the minute they have a drink or a drug, we say to them, step 1. If they have a process addiction and they are acting out on another addiction. We get them to do step 1 on that addiction. Because step 1 is the one that makes them look at themselves and their powerlessness and how unmanageable their life became. Okay, there's another message, Brian. Do you want to?
Yeah. At what stage is an early emotional damage addressed? The damage that often leads to using in the first place. I don't know. Thank you, Deborah. I don't know if I'm saying this question right, but you're asking, there's an assumption that maybe this person has this early emotional damage, and maybe this early emotional damage is the one that leads to their continuous use. The damage that often leads. Okay, I understand that. Thank you. I don't think, so addiction is a culmination of very many reasons. There's the number one reason that I'm an addict. I want to escape how I feel. I love drugs. There's that addiction. There's that reason. There's the biological aspect of it, that my body reacts differently to alcohol. And therefore, when I drink alcohol, I mean, and I'll give an example. I grew up in the same homestead with my brother, and he never ended up alcoholic or addict, and we grew up under the same circumstances. So the reasons that I used to become an addict, or the reason why I used, was because of my mother, because of my father. My brother didn't use them. And I think what this entails is that we could point at the emotional damage, but if it's not the reason, because there are very many other reasons, then we need to work holistically with every other aspect, from their biology to their psychology, to their social backgrounds, to their transition phase, to their values, there's a lot of things that need to be arranged, because we can't focus on one thing as the cause. And sometimes we think maybe that's the cause, but that's not the cause. I'm an addict. You give me something, anything, and I'll use it as a reason to stay in active addiction. So, and that's why our team, I think, is very transverse. We have 12-step programs, we have the psychiatrists on board, we have psychologists, we have yoga masseurs, we have all sorts of, because I don't think there's one fix-it-all solution, especially if it's something that has anything to do with emotional damage. I don't know if I've answered.
It's a great explanation. I sometimes very simplistically say to our clients that it's not that you drink to become an alcoholic. You're an alcoholic and you drink. So we treat it as a primary illness. And of course, 98, 95% of our patients have got emotional trauma. Trauma is the one thing that all addicts do have in common. But it can be trauma from childhood, it can be trauma from adulthood, it can be trauma from addiction. So whatever they present to us in treatment, we work with. But it's not about, because we've got to be so careful. If we work in a way that the addict thinks that he's an addict because of his trauma, he may not get sober. He needs to see that he's an addict, he has trauma. If he works through his trauma with the 12-step program and holistic treatments, he can find recovery. You'll often, if you speak to your loved ones in the first sort of 3 or 4 weeks of recovery and treatment, very often they'll start saying to you, oh, did you know that when you moved me from grade 1 to grade 2 in that funny school, that's where my problem started? Or do you know that when Dad died and you got remarried, that's where my problem started? So the reality is we've got to look at it in the biopsychosocial triangle, that sometimes there's a predisposition to addiction. Sometimes it's the psychological component. Sometimes they just landed up hanging out with the wrong crowd of kids at school, started smoking a bit of dope, the other kids moved on and they became addicted. So like Brian said, it's not one size fits all. But in the biopsychosocial, which the psychologists do, and then the psychiatrist does his or her own history taking, where we find the trauma, we do work with it, but it's not primary. The trauma is in addition to all the other work that we do in recovery. Because if we only focus on that and we don't get them sober, then they're going to leave treatment, keep on using, and then cause more trauma. So we put, it's the chemicals first. We've got to teach them how to put the chemicals down and stay down. And that's our biggest struggle in rehabs across the planet, is getting them to see that you love drugs. You are always going to have a component of loving alcohol and drugs, but you no longer need them. And you no longer need to escape. Because that's actually, in a nutshell, what addiction is. It's, I love to escape what I'm thinking, feeling, and experiencing. Are there any other questions or comments, or, you know, we can open it now. I'm going to switch the recording off.